Hello and welcome to the Green Voice podcast, where you get all the dirt on sustainability in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm your host, Grant Ervin with S&B USA, and I have an exciting partner in crime with me here today, Tim Thiel from Covestro. Tim, welcome to the Center for Media Innovation at Point Park University. We're glad to have you here in the studio.
Yeah, thanks, Grant. I appreciate it. It's good to see you.
Yeah, we're always in kind of the same circles in sustainability, so we see each other at a lot of meetings frequently. So I'm glad that you came in for a visit today.
Thank you.
So, we've had the team from Covestro in, so I'm glad that we were able to get you in here today. But wanted to first talk a little bit about kind of your role with the company, and you've had an interesting history and trajectory into kind of your place in sustainability within Covestro. So I'd just love you to have the opportunity to share that first.
Yeah, and it's funny. I like to say I'm a recovering accountant.
Okay.
So I started off in the company as an accountant, and then here we are today, right?
Yeah.
So my wife's telling me I don't have the personality to be behind a desk all the time being an accountant, so that's probably why. But
you're bucking the trend.
Yeah, exactly.
There you go.
I just had my 25 years last week.
Awesome.
We had a celebration for anyone at the company, 25 years. Various roles, a lot of experience in marketing. You and I have talked in the past on energy efficiency in the building and construction space. So I spent years in that. And lo and behold, a few years ago, they said, we need people in sustainability. And you've been here, know the space.
Yeah.
And I kind of was morphed into that role. And most recently, with Covestro's focus on circular economy, I was moved into a group which we call Circular Economy and Sustainable Transformation. So, our group's looking at how can I transform this company in the short, mid, and long term to be as circular and sustainable as possible. So kind of a cool role.
Yeah, that's exciting. A couple of things here maybe to break down a little bit. One is just the role of the accountant. I've been making note of this a lot in kind of my work at S&B in terms of the accounting function is very critical to sustainability. A, and B, you're starting to see kind of two pathways in which accounting plays a role. One is obviously on the P&L and the cost side, but the actual accounting of carbon emissions and kind of that information really requires an accounting skill set. So it's not just the programmatic side that you have in sustainability, but accounting and finance. How has that helped you in your role?
It's interesting because I've talked to people in the past about how accounting's twofold now. Like you said, it's financials, and then we have carbon accounting.
Yeah.
I will say I think it's a new skill and a new trade out there. Anyone listening in university type age, I would highly suggest taking some classes in carbon accounting, doing LCAs. You'll be in very high demand from companies such as Covestro's and others in the industry, probably even Grant, your company as well. What I'll say is really it's a new way of accounting. It's looking at your product and, not balance sheets and economics wise, but, what's the carbon footprint of my product today? And frankly, part of my role is what can I change that product carbon footprint to be in X years from now? How can I lower that, and how can I get it to zero, which is Covestro's goal? Climate neutrality, get our products to zero as fast as possible. And accounting along the way is going to be mission critical here. Right. Marking our progress, watching our progress, accounting for our progress. The other thing I'll say is, with some of these new sustainability efforts such as ISCC Plus certification of materials and mass balancing of materials, which is a new / old way to account for bio-based and recycled content. There's enormous amounts of, I will say, bookkeeping. So again, accounting on that side of it as well.
It's so fascinating to see that type of evolution because you've gone from, a lot of pushback or the fear of the unknown in terms of sustainability, right? Like, why are we doing this? Why is this important? But when you start to intersect those financial measures and the needs for the skill sets of a financial mind, if you will, into the process, it's really essential.
Yeah, and it is, and I will say the mindset has changed, and I like to use this example, actually. We've had customers ask us about energy efficiency, sustainability for years. In these large, I would say, annual customer meetings, they'll have supplier day or, Covestro day. 3-4 years ago, sustainability might be a 10 to 20 minute agenda item. I would say now that has really morphed over into sometimes half the day. So our customers really are interested. Again, we do talk about the accounting for it. They're interested in what's Covestro doing out there to have lower emissions, basically to pass along to them so that then their customers and their end products reap the benefits of lower emissions as well.
That's terrific. Maybe to back up a quick second, Covestro is a company that here in Pittsburgh, we know because we see the brand, we see folks out in the community a lot.
Our quite large sign coming from the airport.
Your quite large sign coming from the airport. Whoever's idea that was, it's a winner because it's a great brand builder. But maybe talk to us a little bit about the company, both in terms of its origins, but also the different types of products and materials and sectors that you're involved in.
Yep. So, Covestro at heart is a polymer chemistry company, right? What I'll say is, I've seen it over time in my 25 years, moving from, again, we're going to account for the economics, we're going to service our customers and industry, to now really our main mission revolves around sustainability, circularity, and innovation. We've always been an innovative company in our sectors. You asked me, what sectors we work in. Obviously, I'm looking at your shirt.
Construction.
S&B USA Construction. Construction's a large segment for ours. Applications that you're pretty well aware of in your role. Insulation board, our polycarbonate plastics will go into sky lighting and day lighting. We still have some business in LED lighting. Electronics is a large business for us. Plastics and electronics, coatings and electronics. Soft furniture. So mattresses, the bed you sleep on, the couch you watch TV on, the couch you probably watch a Steeler game and were angry about the other day.
Yeah, my neighbor in my hotel I was staying with wasn't too happy.
Yeah. Soft furniture is a large market. And finally, we have coatings, adhesive sealants across all of these markets as well. And really, the refrigerator you have at home insulated with our polyurethane foam too.
That's amazing. How does that diversity happen over time? You've been there for 25 years. Like, have you seen new products be added over the course of time, and how does that happen? Or is there a base foundation and you continue to kind of press through with those?
Yeah, I think it's a base foundation. I'll use the mattress market as an example because I'm very well versed in that. Worked in it for about 5 years in marketing. As part of my career path. But when you look at a mattress, most people don't know this. There's really like a base layer of foam.
Yeah.
And that layer has probably always been there over the years. Where we've seen
as your basic mattress.
Yeah, it's your basic mattress. Could be just one layer of foam. And that foam will have a certain chemistry and have certain properties to it. Over the years, people have started to talk about, man, I want my mattress to be more comfortable. I wish my mattress slept cool, and I'm using air quotes for those who can't see me. Hot sleep, something people complain about. So then over the years, companies like Covestro have innovated in our materials in these different layers of the mattress. So your typical mattress now, will have a base layer of foam, maybe what they call a transition layer, which adds some comfort. And the top layer is the really nice one, which a lot of people call memory or visco foam. The innovation's happening there. So, we've seen these markets kind of change in a good way when it comes to technology, innovation, and then obviously sustainability as well.
You get better sleep, but there's a lot behind that.
Yeah, exactly. We're giving better sleep to you, but we had to innovate. And then really with all this in mind is, as we design new products, keep sustainability, circularity in mind, because at the end of life, how can we as Covestro help make those products more recyclable, more circular for their next life or next cycle, let's call it.
So that's fascinating. And you've used the term circular a couple times, and I don't want to assume for our audience that folks know what that means, but it's a term that's become much more present in the sustainability conversation, right? From a Covestro standpoint, can you talk to us what circularity means to you and to the company?
Yep. Circularity really, this country and this world has been used to a linear economy where, let's say Covestro makes a good, Grant, you use said good, at the end of life, that good, has no further use and frankly would go into a landfill, right? The circular part of it from Covestro, and it's fully circular, is, at the front end, we're looking at new materials to make the good, whether it's the mattress, an automotive part, electronics, what have you, whatever chemistry and market we're looking at. We're looking at recycled content or bio-type materials that there's a circularity starts there. The energy we would use at our facilities, we're looking at renewable type energies. We have some virtual VPPA agreements already in place for our Baytown site, for instance, in Texas. Then you look at
the power purchase agreements.
Yes.
So you're purchasing renewable power to power the factory effectively. Okay.
And to lower our scope emissions as well. So as we go along the line, the next part would be really we're looking at design a product. And we talked about that. How do I design the product to be more circular? And then once we sell the product to our customer, we've been working with our customers now to say, okay, at the end of life, what can we do with some of these products? Would like to get them back into the chain.
Interesting.
Obviously, we're not there yet as a society in every single market or industry we play in.
Sure.
One of the examples, I'll go back to mattress. We have pilot scale projects in Europe on doing exactly that. When the mattress comes out of commission, let's call it at year 10, typical lifespan of a mattress, we're working with some sorters and some other partners, university, government in Europe, to try to get the foam back from those mattresses. And then we would, advanced recycling is a term. Some people say chemical recycling.
Advanced recycling.
Yep.
Okay, this is like the 400 level, not the 101.
It's a new AR, right?
Okay, yeah.
So advanced recycling, chemical recycling, depolymerization. You'll hear all these terms out in the industry for the audience.
Depolymerization. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Okay. So after 25 years, we were taught to be a chemist. So if you spend enough time with me, you'll become versed in it a little bit. But
I could go back to my 10th grade chemistry class and get a better grade. Okay.
Yeah, same here, to be honest. But so depolymerization would be taking that mattress foam back to its true raw material monomers.
Okay.
And then the process would be we would then resell them to our customers who make new foam, that make a new mattress that gets to an end user such as you.
Wow.
And then the cycle starts over again.
Because that polymer doesn't disappear, right? It just gets repurposed or re-engineered.
To itself, yep. So you basically, you're taking back the foam to its original.
And how would you do that? Like melt it down, heat?
It's heat and a lot of things over our 10th grade chemistry class, to be honest. But once it gets back to its monomers, then again, we're actually at the point where we would have been originally with a fossil-based raw material.
So you're back in the lab, effectively.
Yeah, so it's kind of cool. So you're not using new oil, let's call it. You're using a product. And I think what we say is, every waste is really just a new product for something else, right?
Yeah.
And everything has carbon. How do we capture and use that carbon over and over and over again rather than it go to, frankly, a landfill or an end of life that's not in line with our sustainability goals?
That's fascinating. And you talk about the pilot there in Europe. I remember visiting multiple European countries and cities, and one of the things that they do, I'm going to say a better job of, is a separation. Is that that's how critical is that?
Yeah. And I lived in Europe a couple different stints for short periods of time, 4 to 6 months, and I remember, here in the U.S., we're all used to throw all my recycling in a big toter or a square bin and carry it.
Single source, single
exactly.
stream. Yeah.
And then you're relying on someone else to sort it. In Europe, I lived in France for university for a little bit and in Germany for work. You basically have a different bag and or container per substrate. So you have one for metal, one for glass, and they take it even further. You'd have one for brown glass, clear glass, green glass, and then you'd have different ones for your plastics. Putting the sorting onto the consumer, to me, is a good idea.
Yeah.
You're already getting the sorted items to a recycling or MRF facility.
Municipal recovery facility.
Yeah, I'm using a lot of acronyms. I'm glad you're here to translate for me. It's like it's a new language, right?
It's a new language. That's it.
So yeah, I would say culturally in that part of Europe's ahead of the U.S. And then we know this regulation-wise. Typically, Europe is ahead of the U.S. when it comes to sustainability and circularity.
From a design and manufacturing standpoint, is that what's that look like from the value chain? Like, instead of using raw materials, you guys are now starting to hunt and search for these pre-existing products that are, effectively out there in the environment, and can we collect them? Is that the right question?
Yeah. So it's new. We honestly have our typical procurement function that buys our normal, let's say, fossil-based goods and raw materials. We also have energy procurement, which are the folks looking at virtual power, wind, renewable solar. And then now we really have a group which we call circular procurement.
Really?
Their global role is doing exactly what you said. Where can I find new novel raw materials, resins, recycled content that Covestro can use rather than use a fossil-based? That would be working with, it's pretty neat. It's working with our current.
I just wanted to say that out loud. Circular procurement.
Circular economy procurement, circular procurement. Yep.
Okay.
And it's kind of neat because not only would they be working with our typical suppliers that we've had relationships forever, we're looking into the startup world. We're looking into, things that might be coming out of universities or things that are just coming out, new value chain players that didn't exist. The other part of it you kind of mentioned is we have to be adept and attuned to this whole infrastructure, whether it's sorting and collection. I will say it's pretty interesting in Europe. A couple of our sites, we got what they call a waste permit and or a recycling permit. So our sites can actually, at some point, when we're ready, take in, recycle it, which some might consider waste. So we had to get permitted for it. So we're really laying the groundwork now for what we could do in the future.
To be that collection entity?
To be both. So, I think in my mind and, in Covestro's mind, we could be what they call like a recycler producer, where we could be taking in goods at our sites that are off-casts or wastes from others and turning them into raw materials that we use. So the mattress one would be one, at some point in the future, could we be a collection center for used mattresses in Europe or in the U.S., bring them in, and then reuse that foam, and then get the rest of the mattress to other players in the value chain that could use those parts and pieces that we can't use.
That's fascinating. So what's that search look like? Both for the materials, but also for, you mentioned like the startup and the innovation side. Like, what are you guys seeing in both? Like the hunting and the gathering, I guess. Like,
it's not easy, I will say.
No, yeah.
When you think about value chains, often they're fragmented. If you think about the U.S., a lot of goods have issues with recycling just because of fragmentation of recycling centers.
The quality that
shipping,
you get out of
the quality of the recyclate. Recycling centers all have different technologies, some manual, some not. But really the search, it's, for lack of a better term, it's wide and vast in this new, I would say, industry canvas, let's call it. But these are all areas in the past we weren't spending this much time getting to learn, our entire value chain and value circle in this instance. I know we're working with, for instance, our logistics companies. We're going to have to set up new logistics, new routes, economical routes and economical ways to do this if this is going to work. So
to collect or mine those materials.
And mine those materials and get them back.
Right.
And frankly, we're having conversations with them as well. Back to the topic from before is, how can they help lower the emissions too?
Right.
So as they're moving any of Covestro's goods around or bringing us raw materials, what are they doing with their fleets, whether it's rail fleets, truck fleets, what have you? What are they doing to lower their emissions, so then we're absorbing less emissions?
You see that a lot, conversations from, our colleague Justine Russo up at Pitt, Ohio. They're deep in that from a logistics standpoint because exactly what you're saying. Companies that work with them to haul materials are asking,
same thing.
How do you, what are you guys doing to reduce your emissions? What's your footprint? What's your fuel costs? All those sorts of things. So everybody's having that conversation.
I was at a trade show last week on sustainability right here in Pittsburgh, and PGT Trucking talked about something very similar.
Interesting. So it's starting to spread. What do you guys see as being one of the things I wanted to drive into you guys is this topic of Scope 3 emissions. So we've had previous conversations here on the show around Scope 1 and 2, but Scope 3 is like the elusive accounting function for sustainability professionals, and we're in the process of it right now at S&B, where we're we got a good handle around kind of our fleet and our energy costs, those Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. Mm-hmm. But now as we start to dive into the Scope 3, it's like an eye-opening function. One, in terms of like the complexity, but two, like the volume.
Yeah, it's just the volume of what you have to look at even.
Exactly.
One thing I'll say, and you'll laugh at this, if everyone got their Scope 1 and 2 to 0 and the whole world would have no Scope 3. So it would be the easiest thing ever. It would be
just put 0 down.
Yeah, it'd be the easiest thing ever. My Scope 3 or 0. Covestro in the last year announced Scope 3 goals, 30% reduction by 2035, which is about 10 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So we have quite an aggressive goal.
And that's just to educate folks. That's looking at your supply chain.
Yep, our supply chain,
right?
Inbound and outbound. So raw materials coming in, our materials when they go out, all the way to end of life. So that's why a lot of this conversation today so far, I've hinted and talked about recycling.
Yeah,
that's going to all be part of those Scope 3
because it's a huge factor in you reducing your Scope 3 emissions.
Yep. So keeping it out of landfill and recycling it is going to reduce those Scope 3. What I will say, anyone listening on the emissions side of things, I see companies release goals, and I'll say, "Oh, what's your plan for that?" And they'll say, "We'll come up with that later." Mm-hmm. I really highly suggest that people, and Covestro did this, come up with project detail behind your Scope 1, 2, and 3 goals, and then build your goal rather than come up with a number and then later on try to build that detail to get to the number.
Because if you don't do that, you don't know how.
Exactly. And then you're scrambling close to the date that you said you're going to be carbon neutral.
2029, December 31st, 2029, and you're like, oh.
Or frankly, you're going to come up with a reason and punt the goal a couple years out. So I'd highly suggest that. What I'll say in the Scope 3 side, it's a lot of we talked about. It's not easy. Mm-hmm. It's talking to your logistics and transportation, like you had mentioned, and then really it's talking to all your inbound materials and looking for what I would say alternative sources, like I talked about, whether it's startup or new companies. Just off the top of my head, a couple of things we're looking at, again, I'll use the term advanced recycling. We're looking at a couple advanced recycling companies that we signed basically letters of intent with for future supply. Mm-hmm. One is called BioBTX, and that agreement's going to be in Europe. And one is called Encina, and that agreement's going to be in the United States. What those companies are doing, they're taking municipal solid waste, the 2B model. Okay. Again, this isn't today. Their 2B model would be to take municipal solid waste in the areas or regions that we operate in, and then
where you have manufacturing.
Where we have manufacturing, they would have a technology that would then advance recycle that back into raw materials we can use. In the instance of BTX, it's in the name, it's benzene, toluene, and xylene. These are materials that we can pull back through our process and use. Benzene and toluene, they're very critical to our production. Xylene, not as critical. But again, it's trash. Just to be frank, it's other people's trash.
So this is going into municipal landfills
today and
mining those materials out.
Well, not letting them even get to there.
Or catching beforehand.
So future state would be catch them beforehand, divert them to these two companies' facilities. They would do shredding, pre-processing, what have you, and then they are going to turn that into the raw materials that we need through their processes that are, again, back to advanced or chemical recycling.
So it's basically like they catch them and then they process them and then release them back to you.
To us, yep. So again, as we, the paradigm shift will be industry and Covestro's fossil-based raw material production and or purchases over time should start and will go down. And then purchases of what we'll call alternative materials, whether it's bio-based or what we're talking about here, recycled content or recycle it, will go up. So that would be the goal, is start shifting.
And then your Scope 3 emissions.
Your Scope 3 will go right along with that.
What was give me a sense of like just the beginning, like the timeline and the complexity of that process? Because I would imagine that your supply chain is massive and complex.
Yeah, and I mean, to get anything, agreements like that, to get them into place, you're talking a year plus minimum.
Sure.
Now, I wasn't heavily involved in either of those, but absolutely a year plus, and then you have enormous bandwidth of functions involved, let's call it, where procurement's obviously involved. And then we have our chemists and our analytical type people looking at these new materials that are made in some sort of lab scale now, and the to-be sense is going to be full-scale facilities to get this waste turned into materials we can use. You have the analytical work. Is it going to be the same quality? How is it going to impact their end product? How might it impact our customer's end product? All this has to be taken into consideration when you change an input.
Yeah.
So it's not, a lot of these aren't just plug and play.
No.
So there is,
because you're inventing new processes along the way in many cases.
Yep. And I mean, our partners are inventing new processes to transform these end-of-life materials into something we can use, and then we're looking at our processes to see if they need to be tweaked or changed to handle these new materials, or if we can stay steady state or not.
Would you say, like, what are the different drivers or pressure points behind that? Like, obviously, at the high level, we have, like, the carbon challenge, right? Like, we're emitting too much CO2 in the atmosphere. It creates a whole set of externalities that are negative for a variety of reasons. But then you also have cost pressures. I would call it the stasis or status quo pressures. If we've done it this way for X number of years. You have the inertia of just changing program and process. How do you divide that up in your mind?
Yeah, and so I think what you're asking is, what's gonna, or what does make people switch to circular, or looking at lower carbon or lowering their emissions.
Yeah, there's a lot of impingements that exist,
and
right?
So the drivers, I will say, and then we can talk about the impingements. Part of my job also is talking to customers. The drivers on their end seem to be multiple places, and it just depends on the company, to be honest with you. So publicly owned companies are trying to hit ESG type scope emissions goals. SEC and publicly traded companies have to report their emissions now. And I think sometimes
Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions.
And I think sometimes this becomes keeping up with the Joneses. I want to report good numbers, right? So I think you
don't want to greenwash.
Exactly. And I want to report drops year over year. And I think some of the drive is that public reporting of information. I think some investors are pushing for it. Investors and companies are pushing for green. I think the second part is some just frankly have customers that want it. We're seeing the consumer-facing type products want it more. So brands that are consumer-facing, things that people buy and touch and feel. I mean,
the mattress.
Yep, mattress. We've heard some textile brands, and you can guess some of them. They're really interested in clothing that's lower carbon, and so you have the consumer demand. I do think people are readying themselves for regulations, if that makes sense. They're really not here yet. We see a little bit in California, New York, and some of the states on recycling, recycled content, and hinging on circularity. U.S. regulations, like I said before, are behind Europe, but I think people are starting to think, I'd rather be prepared now for when they're going to come in X years. And I think other people just, they have their own internal goals and they want to hit them. I mean, like Covestro's goals, of climate neutrality and Scope 1 and 2 of zero. I mean, it's just things we want to do and hit.
Where you have that as a company culture now, right?
Yeah, and to the barriers or impingements like you talked about, cost is always going to be one. We know this, we live it. Whenever you're opening up new materials or new markets, I like to talk about almost like the cell phone. When people didn't all have a cell phone, the sales were flat, and then all of a sudden it exploded like a hockey stick curve.
There's a tipping point.
For linear, yeah. And I mean, these raw materials are going to go slow along before kind of supply demand and economies of scale catch up. So all these new alternative materials are going to be price premium. So that's one barrier. The other barrier,
the greenium,
the greenium, yeah,
green premium,
yeah. The other area is, like you had mentioned, a lot of these companies that we work with and our customers have operated the same way forever. You become risk averse. So the first thing they'll say with a new material, well, how's this going to change my specs, or how's this going to change my durability, or how's this going to change my quality?
Yep.
So there's a learning part to that has to be overcome. So there is some teaching in all of this in the value chain that has to happen. Yeah.
Does that start at the bottom or at the top? Meaning, like, are you seeing companies that are part of like your supply chain come to you with new innovations because they see what you guys are trying to do, or do you have to, hey guys?
Yeah. So I see push and pull. So you'll see push where you'll have new or current suppliers that come up with an alternative way, like the companies I talked about, and then we'll have pull from our customers or our customers or the end consumer that says we want this widget to be more sustainable, have less carbon, be recyclable at end of life, and so then there's a pull. We're in a unique spot because we're kind of in the middle of the value chain.
What do you see with the the companies inside the company on whether it's the procurement or the manufacturer or like the folks on the manufacturing side or product development, that education inside of the company? Like they're using polymer X to do something, and then all of a sudden somebody comes up with a recycled material, and they're like, I don't know, polymer X works pretty well. Like,
Yeah, and I think
what's that like?
It's interesting. A little bit of narrative on that. It's culture change for one,
but they know that polymer X works
better.
Right?
Yeah, and I think it is internal teaching. And when Covestro started out in this journey a few years ago and this full circularity, and you've actually translated nicely for me today, there's a lot of language and acronyms that are very new to people. We made a conscious effort to start training employees internally on this is circularity, this is sustainability, this is a journey we're going to go on. Taught this new vernacular, talked about this new accounting we talked about, and I think laying out that continuum and where we are and where we're going and showing it's going to be different helps to get buy-in. Now, in any case, in companies, you're still going to have not detractors, but people that are the latest to buy in or last to buy in, right? So I think a lot of it is willingness to accept change and really internally training our culture in the company. And we've done a good job of it. We really have very few meetings or large town hall type meetings that sustainability is not part of it now.
Part of the discussion.
I mean, it's just normal day narrative now, to be honest with you.
How do you guys deal with failure? And what I mean by that, that's like a big lofty question, but I want to be like kind of specific with this, is that when you introduce a new practice, process, material, it doesn't work. It's not you don't bat 1,000, right? Yep. Like there's going to be hiccups, and there should be hiccups in some cases, because then you see how to improve it going forward, like a continuous improvement process. But how do you guys deal with that? We're again polymer X. I'm fixing in on that.
Yeah, and I mean, you'll laugh at this. I've done a lot of project work on my own in my career, and I'll say to people on the podcast that it's a quick kill isn't a terrible thing.
Yeah,
and it's never a terrible thing. And a failure really isn't a terrible thing, because your failure should lead to the next success, is how I would say it. So any project we're working on or new material that we're trying to introduce, you're going to learn something from that failure. And to me, so it's further innovation and further R&D. I mean,
it's not linear. It's like
exactly
taking steps. Yeah.
I mean, I think they say, back to my Bear days, I mean, on the drug side of things, I think thousands fail before one is a success, and we celebrate the success, and you learn from all the failures in any industry.
Is the same case. Yep. That's it. One of the things, just to kind of go to the home stretch here a little bit, I'd be real interested for, as you advance this circularity conversation, what do you see, kind of on the horizon, both in terms of like the Scope 3 emissions, but also as a company, just focus in on Pittsburgh a little, because I mean you have a global footprint.
Mm-hmm.
But what are some of the things that you need to help advance into the future, like better recycling policies, or like what are some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, I think one key, and you'll laugh, we talked about it, economics and investment. I will say one exciting thing for Pittsburgh, we recently did our largest investment in this region in decades. We put about $40 million into our labs.
Wow.
In Pittsburgh. The labs support the industries we talked about, automotive, building, construction, and really those labs, those pilot scale equipment and assets that we have to mimic customer production and what's going on in the industry is what we're going to use to innovate and what we're going to use to become more sustainable.
So investing in that R&D.
Investment in R&D and sustainability innovation is going to be key. Infrastructure creation, setup. And again, we're becoming involved in that. We honestly aren't going to be an expert in doing that. It's really collection, sorting the infrastructure to get these materials. And then what I'd say on really the bio-based side of things is growing that supply. So how do you harvest those materials? And harvest, in theory, could be ag waste. It could be wood waste. Used cooking oil is something we're using. So it's like things that you would never thought of.
But how do you
that become a raw material? So how do we, as a company, ensure if we want used cooking oil in our products to replace fossil, how does that supply chain get set up?
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's really the biggest hurdle is these are all new supply chains and what I would say business models for companies like us, as well as the supply chain.
Do you see a lot in the work of the startup community to start to invest, VC and other equity ventures into that space?
Yeah, so there's a lot of, I mean, I can rattle off some really neat raw material type companies, not by name, but by product area that came to me. I mean, there's people looking at, like I had said, lignin. There's people looking at algae, seaweed, and these are all like startup type companies. People were looking at like the remains of farming. The hemp is a big one now. People are looking at
it's interesting
as a new material and as like a bio type material. So I mean, it's really like an open canvas for these startups to start looking at, frankly, any waste that you have.
It's fascinating. You have to put you in touch with a guy I used to work with, Mike Roth, who's now at the Pennsylvania Department of Agriculture, and he's into this kind of space of you mentioned hemp and the industrial applications and materials. It's interesting, like some of your new partners aren't really like I just came from Harrisburg. So
traditional ones.
Yeah, it's not the Department of Community and Economic Development. It's the Department of Agriculture.
Yep.
It's kind of these, the municipal solid waste authorities. Like there's a whole new frontier here.
Yep.
I mean, that's fascinating. Tim, one last question for you. What's kind of on your horizon personally, and like what's up next for you? You're involved in a lot of local nonprofits and nationally in the industry, and important voice for sustainability. What's in your immediate horizon for the next 6 months to a year? What are some?
I have kids soccer tonight. But
all right, that's good.
That's almost every night. I don't think we're talking about that, but yeah, I mean,
we're coming into playoff season soon, aren't we?
Exactly, that too. Yeah. I mean, couple things just, I guess, near and dear to me. I still very active in the building construction space. I think you know this. Currently, I'm the chairman of the board for an organization called Green Building Initiative, which offers building certification called Green Globes.
Yeah,
it's number 2 in the market, the lead, which I think most people know. So I've been spending a lot of time on that. Next year will kind of be my swan song year as outgoing chair.
Chairman Emeritus.
Yeah,
that's the best title.
But I'm not sure. I delegated to myself some committee lead work for next year to try to move that not-for-profit forward. I'm still involved with the 2030 districts national initiative of buildings cutting their energy usage, water, and waste by 50% by 2030. So I'm still involved in that. And really with my job, it's all the stuff we talked about today. It's kind of neat. Anything that's really circular and sustainable, I seem to have my hands on at some point or comes across my desk. So it's fun because it's new. It's new every day. And some of these materials we talked about, I mean, it's ever changing.
That's exciting. Well, Tim, thank you for your service and the work that you guys do at Covestro. I think it's awesome to see companies here in Pittsburgh that are on the frontier of next generation innovation, and thanks for your leadership in that space.
Thank you for having me today. I appreciate it, Grant.
Excellent. Thank you for listening in to The Green Voice. We appreciate you guys, your ears and eyes. Thanks to the team here at the Center for Media Innovation, as well as the team at Pittsburgh Earth Day. I'm Grant Ervin with S&B USA. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you at the next episode.